Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I am Ruth McCausland. I'm the UNSW Director of the Yuwaya Ngarra-li partnership between the university and the Dharriwaa Elders Group in Walgett. I'm joining today from Bidjigal country at UNSW. I pay respects to elders past and present here. And I also pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the unceded country that you're all joining from today, and in particular pay my respects to elders in Walgett, past and present, on Gamil country. Thanks for joining us today for this conversation with the wonderful Samantha Rich about her Masters of Architecture project. Gamil, dhuningarraay, place of older person, ageing in place in Walgett, reciprocity of care. This is going to be an in conversation, but the idea is that I talk as little as possible, so we hear as much as we can from Sam, who'll be talking about the process of developing her master's project with the elders in Walgett and the detail of the design that she has developed, what is now a multi-award winning project. So this was certainly not Sam's idea to have an entire webinar devoted to her. She's an extraordinarily humble person, but we are very keen to share the work that she's developed, in particular because our next project is to get this funded and built in Walgett, which would be a truly wonderful thing. But I would like to now introduce you to Sam. I won't read out her extensive bio, but I will ask her to introduce herself in the way that she would like to and give us a bit of context to this project in terms of the background of her work in this area and the knowledge that she's brought to the project. Sam, welcome.
Thanks, Ruth. So I would just also like to acknowledge that I'm meeting on Bidjigal country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, as well as Ruth said, all of the lands that you're meeting on, as well as from the elders on Gamil country in Walgett, who kind of made this project possible. And so I am a Wiradjuri woman, studied architecture, work in architecture and research now. I came across Yuwaya Ngarra-li through a few teachers at UNSW who kind of initially thought I could do a research project with them, and ended up kind of starting to work with Yuwaya Ngarra-li in the middle of COVID when they needed a housing scoping exercise done around emergency accommodation so that people could isolate safely during the pandemic. And, you know, I'd already been kind of working in this space in terms of like working with firms that work with community. I'd been also working with a cultural consultancy firm, looking at kind of connecting with country and working with elders in order to kind of share stories and how you translate that into the built environment. So it was definitely something that I'd already kind of been working in, and something that especially my mum had kind of instilled in me, is to kind of always give back to my community as much as possible, and as a driving force of kind of what I do. So yeah, and, you know, I've been lucky enough for that to evolve, and, you know, since working on the housing scoping exercises, it really kind of put a fire in me to try and be able to help out more in a more kind of consistent and serious way. And so when I got into the final year of my my master's, I really kind of tried to push to have a self-directed studio where I could work with Yuwaya Ngarra-li on a housing need of their choice, and kind of through the efforts of a few different people and support from Yuwaya Ngarra-li and the Dharriwaa Elders Group, I was able to kind of do this project, which is so amazing and such kind of a fundamental thing in my learning. Yeah.
Thanks, Sam. And yeah, housing has certainly been an area and an unmet need, to put it mildly, in Walgett. And since for a long time, and since I've been working closely with the Elders Group, first on a research study, which was about the criminalisation of Aboriginal people with cognitive disability, mental health issues, and then working longer term in partnership since 2015, really. Housing had always been raised by the elders and other community members as a huge area of need. And Sam, it wasn't really till you and other colleagues at UNSW like Eva Lloyd became closer collaborators that the possibilities of actually thinking about embedding in housing in our work and doing that in an evidence-based and culturally and community-led way became possible. So it's been really exciting to watch that develop through this project and other work, particularly around thinking about accommodation for young people in contact with the justice system, as well as crisis accommodation and the needs around that. And of course, as with everything we do, it's a systemic issue in Walgett, but also elsewhere. So a lot of our work attempts to build evidence-based solutions that can have relevance at a scale. But I think, you know, going to a bit more detail about the history of elders' work is in a briefing paper, a housing briefing paper that you've compiled, which is on the Yuwaya Ngarra-li website for those who are interested.
This project, Aging in Place, was first chosen by the Yuwaya Ngarra-li because they have multiple housing needs. So really kind of the choice was driven by the Elders Group, which is how the partnership kind of fundamentally operates. It was also kind of made sense because of the existing work that had already been done by Yuwaya Ngarra-li in terms of kind of aging well in community by multiple authors, but one of them being Ruth. And so after some initial conversations, this theme of reciprocity of care kind of came out as like a really strong kind of focus and theme of what the housing should look like and what it should focus on.
Yeah, the study that Sam mentioned around aging well was a small grant. It was a qualitative study enabled by a small grant from the Aging Futures Institute at UNSW, which was really responding to the elders wanting to do some work with UNSW around what it means to age well for older Aboriginal people in Walgett. And it was this wonderful qualitative study where people talked about their vision for ageing on country, and there was a lot of really rich discussion around that. And there was an article that's been published which has got some of the qualitative kind of methodology and the wonderful quotes from the elders. But what emerged from that was certainly a big need around appropriate housing that matched elders' aspirations for ageing well on country. And I guess that really formed the basis of this master's project, Sam, and I guess other work that had been done by, for example, engineering honours students around thermal comfort. Angela Begg in particular was a former photovoltaic engineering student, and Aidan Alexander, who'd also looked at issues around energy poverty in relation to housing. So there had been some research that was relevant to your work here, Sam. But in terms of thinking about a structure, you really started to work in detail with the elders at the outset of your project. So I think we were going to talk a little bit, I suppose, about the Elders Group itself, just as a bit of context for those of you who don't already know much about the DEG. They're an association of Aboriginal elders in Walgett who have been around for more than 20 years as an association and always worked around community interests, community development, and particularly cultural knowledge, and have got increasingly involved in advocacy and research and policy over the years too, which is partly what led to the partnership with the Elders Group in particular. But it's a long-term partnership now. We're enabled by philanthropic funding and support at the uni end. But it's also now projects that range from work around youth justice, which is very early where we started, but also working around food and water security. So on our last webinar focused on that, and then Sam's work around housing. So Sam, shall I hand back to you now to talk a little bit about the process and methodology of your masters? So that's just a photo from 2016 in the early days of the partnership between the Elders Group and UNSW. And this was after a youth justice forum that we had held. You can see it's a while ago. Everybody's hair has changed significantly. We've all aged, but this was in the early days of our partnership and around the elders' vision for change around that issue in particular.
This is just where Walgett or Walgar is situated, and it's quite diverse. So you have multiple language groups that kind of come together and share this place and call this place home. But also, most importantly, it's the meeting of two rivers, which is what Walgar means, which is the lifeblood of this community. So kind of first and foremost, in kind of coming up with the project, or starting with a project, is really important to start embedding in the work the Yuwaya Ngarra-li principles, in particular looking at community-led, culturally connected, strengths-focused and holistic. So just kind of making sure that the housing project is embedded in what the community wanted, because these principles were formulated by the Dharriwaa Elders Group, as well as kind of what I bring as a Wiradjuri woman in my process and how I kind of undertake my work with community, and understanding that these kind of come together. So this is Yinjamara, which is just kind of a cultural Wiradjuri way of being, doing, thinking. And it means to kind of do things with respect, with gentleness, and slowly and intent. And actually in Gamil language, they have a similar word, which is balawa. So it aligns quite a lot in kind of our ways of doing, but it recognizes that I do come with my own kind of cultural principles. So fundamental, as Ruth has said, for me to able to do this project well, was kind of working not from scratch, but kind of working from this wealth of kind of research that had already been undertaken, which really was incredibly fundamental to me being able to do a good job. In particular, the Aging Well report was basically my Bible in terms of kind of trying to understand the elders' perspectives and their priorities of aging well, and making sure that I'm not going out there and asking the same questions that have already been undertaken. So utilizing the existing kind of knowledge about this topic and building upon that to kind of make a richer and kind of deeper solution to a systemic problem. And this is kind of also looking at what the future could look like, and we're in the process of trying to kind of undertake this, but trying to think about how this can move forward. So during the masters, even though it's there's quite a lot of time pressures and constraints in the masters program, as much as possible, we tried to kind of follow like a really strong methodology and make sure that the project is kind of underpinned with these principles. And I worked closely with Yuwaya Ngarra-li and people there to kind of understand the community a lot better, because I couldn't always be out there, but also kind of being fueled and mentored by my design tutors, Eva Lloyd and Michael Mossman, and how that kind of played out. So, at every stage kind of getting feedback, doing a lot of kind of extensive research and going through existing information to kind of make sure that I am equipped with as much knowledge about the community and what's already been done, and then kind of coming to a concept, going out to community to kind of have those conversations. So from this process, three kind of main themes really came out as being really important. That being housing is relational, so it really needs to be connected to health, well-being, country, culture, and community. Research is relational, so it's really important that we build upon existing work and approach it with a holistic lens, so that we're not kind of having that kind of consultation fatigue, and that everything is kind of moving towards solving some of these needs that are evident within our communities. And finally, and almost most importantly, is making sure it's community-led. And so always honouring that the community knows best. And obviously, as kind of somebody that's still kind of growing in my profession and in my work, this was one thing that was really kind of clear in the process of the masters. You kind of come out and you have this idea of what the model should look like, but the elders were very clear exactly what would and wouldn't work, and kind of honouring that and making sure that those voices and those opinions were preferenced over my own personal views. So the idea after the initial visit out to Walgett, so the first visit was kind of like building relationships and just kind of getting to know the community. And from those conversations, it became clear that reciprocity is really important. And so the research question that was created from this was, how can housing recreate, support and heal Indigenous ways of caring for elders on country? But reciprocity to Indigenous people and to our thinking is about reciprocity to country, to community and family, to care for our older elders, to continue that knowledge transfer that was kind of gifted to the elders and allow them to, have that continual kind of knowledge transfer to the younger generation, and share culture. So you'll see these kind of throughout the presentation, and these are part of that amazing journal that I kind of utilised a lot within the process, is these quotes from the elders that are in the Aging Well report.
Just acknowledging too that Mel Anderson, who was one of the researchers on that research, is actually joining today. So a little shout out to Mel there.
Yeah, a big
and Eileen Baldry's there too. There's quite a few people who've been involved in this work for a long time who are popping up in the attendees list.
Yes, a big thank you to all of the people that were contributing to this research, because it was so amazing and fundamental to this process. And so this is just kind of a quick call out, and it was one of those things which you just use as, am I making sure that I'm following this? How can I kind of prevent within the housing, what are ways that the housing can kind of remove these barriers of aging well in Walgett?
And I guess that Aging Well study was really led by priorities from the Elders Group itself, and there'd been conversations that have been happening for decades. So the study itself captured that, the research questions, and the research itself was led by the Elders Group. But it was really about answering the questions that they wanted answered. So the researchers involved were kind of, documenting that, but that work had been developing and going on for many years, the nuance of that. So acknowledging too all of the work that the Dharriwaa Elders Group had done over decades to kind of lead to this research and this point. And Sam, one of those really key things was you understanding all of that, as you said, before you went with your kind of project in mind and your master's project. And it will be great as the hour continues to hear a bit more from you about how you managed to hold the integrity around the history of that work, the principle of doing no harm, your own cultural protocols in the work, as well as the local community priorities and protocols, and then also meeting the criteria of a master's project. Because I think everybody who's joining us here who works in a university setting just understands just how challenging that must have been at times.
Yes. Yes, it is definitely a juggle. So this housing is relational. So I guess in order to kind of answer that question of how to age well, it's important to understand the different concepts of home, and that it's beyond merely the physical structure, and it ties in with place, the country, community, and people that we feel at home around. And so if you think of home in that way, then you kind of start to think of it in terms of how it relates to that place. Like the siding is really important, like who in the family is it connected to, how does it kind of reference country if you can't always be outside, especially if you're aging and you might have days where you're a bit immobile. So kind of the first part of kind of understanding what home looks like to elders, obviously from a really kind of an outsider's opinion, it's always going to be a little bit one-dimensional, but as much as possible trying to kind of understand what this place is about. And as said previously, the river is the two rivers are so fundamental to this community. So understanding this entire picture, so just zooming out and looking at this beautiful river and how it is the life source of not just that community, but this whole area, and all of the kind of significant places, that you can kind of map, and that might not be kind of mapped as well because they're culturally private, but just trying to understand what this place is about so that you can design properly for it. And one of the aspects of what this place is about, kind of moving back to a more intimate scale, is understanding the socio-spatial dynamics of this place. And this kind of really started to come out in conversations with both Yuwaya Ngarra-li staff, Dharriwaa Elders staff, Walgett Aboriginal elders as well, that the dynamics of the space in town are still quite kind of have some complexity, and it's not always, especially depending on the type of person, it will change. And so this is a one-dimensional kind of look at what spaces feel like to people, but really important to kind of understand, because citing something on potentially the east side of town could kind of trigger some feelings of negative memories and things like that maybe the elders have experienced. So trying to understand those dynamics so that again, the housing is kind of a place of wellness and safety, and trying to kind of keep that in mind. And so in the master's process, it was kind of a lot of juggling kind of, how to be, community-led, how to kind of keep to time constraints of the master's program, but also trying to kind of, the goal for me in this project was always to kind of do something that really mattered and that could kind of come out as a tangible thing that the elders could use. I didn't want to do anything that was just going to be kind of put in a cupboard and not looked at. And even if it wasn't going to be me, I wanted them to be able to have something that they could go and then go to somebody and get built. And so it was, in the process, was it bringing in a village of kind of knowledge and understanding that, as a master's student, I'm still kind of growing and learning, and I need a lot of these expertise in order to make sure that I'm designing properly, and thinking about all of the kind of complexity of working in remote communities. So these are just some of the people that really were fundamental in creating this design. So even though, I'm talking, it's from all of these people and all of these conversations and all of their knowledge that has really kind of made it as kind of, developed and thoughtful as it is. And, really important in this community is, especially in communities, is looking at places of community already. And one of the, this quote is amazing because it talks about the community that Dharriwaa Elders Group creates. And so it's like, utilizing these amazing community places, and how do you draw upon them in order to kind of like add more community spaces or connect with that place where people already feel comfortable. And so in looking at this, relationality, it's looking at, how does the housing work with the services? So in order to kind of make sure that elders can age well in community in Walgett, it's about what services do they need and how can the housing support that. But also, from a kind of a realistic or tangible perspective, it's like, you can't only be building new places. How can you improve existing houses? And this was really kind of building upon the research that's been done by the engineering students around kind of thermal comfort and things like that, in order to understand, okay, so what needs to happen in order to make existing homes that elders are living in healthier, so that they can stay in community and they're not more adversely affected by, poor kind of no insulation or poor internal environments. And, this relationality applies to kind of social programs, because we know that you know, it's not just a house, it kind of, you need all of these elements. And so these were just some of the things that were identified as being kind of important in order to kind of make sure that the housing would work within the community and help with Walgett Aboriginal elders to age well. But also because I had the privilege of working with Yuwaya Ngarra-li alongside in parallel with this project, it meant that I was really aware of all of the things that Yuwaya Ngarra-li and Dharriwaa Elders Group were doing in the community to kind of improve the livelihood of the Aboriginal community, and thinking about how can all of these broader community needs be also addressed in a housing project. Because obviously the more that we're doing all of these kind of smaller incidental things kind of works together to make a bigger change. It helps make the bigger change easier. So kind of as much as possible trying to kind of consider these broader community needs. So community-led. So this is like a little diagram that I did in order to kind of try and articulate how the project or the process should work, and that this kind of conversation between kind of the client and the carers should be continuous, and it should be kind of flowing and, you know, through from planning to like post and evaluation, in order to make sure that you're really kind of listening and making sure that it is community led. And based on, I think after one or both of the visits up to Walgett, it became clear from my perspective that, you know, I needed to kind of put in place some cultural protocols for when I'm doing workshops with elders, and just to kind of make sure that, you know, I do my cultural due diligence of practicing in Jamara, but also not doing any harm. And how can I make sure that whatever I'm presenting to them is kind of presented in a way that's thoughtful and respectful. And some of the needs within the community are really personal, and there's been a history of hurt and things not being done. And so just kind of trying to reduce that further harm within how I work with the elders group is really important. And so I came up with this kind of diagram to articulate, you know, all of the ways that I can kind of try and get feedback from everyone and get their different kind of perspective of how to present ideas. Because this isn't always taught to you as in architecture, is like, how do you present your ideas to community?
And Sam, in terms of your master's or your undergraduate, what was the cultural content of that like?
I mean, it was really light. It was really light. And a lot of it was, so I think the first time that I kind of really had something big kind of be introduced to me was in my final undergraduate studio, where I was interested in looking at the Aboriginal history of the area, and somebody introduced me to the Paul Memmott book about Aboriginal architecture in Australia. And then I think when I went into masters, it was also really lacking, and I was really kind of, I guess from my perspective, I was a bit disappointed because, you know, for my own growth, I really was seeking to be kind of equipped with skills to help my community and to work with my community, and also just to learn things that I wanted to learn. And so I think it drove me to kind of, you know, do units, you know, in other kind of degrees, like I did Indigenous kind of partnerships and conservation, which was such an amazing unit because it's co-designed with Uncle Bruce Pascoe. And I think almost all of the literature in there that they give you is all Aboriginal or First Nations academics. And that was the first time that I'd ever been given so much content that was written by First Nations people. And the way that it shifted my mindset and my way of thinking was just so amazing. And so I think that and this final year with Yuwaya Ngarra-li, I completely kind of helped to progress my cultural education of how, and equip me with the skills that I wanted in order to practice in my professional life. So this is this is one of the housing workshops with the elders, which were both like they were some of the most like fundamental. The workshops are still very fundamental in my learning progress with the community and how to kind of work and how to communicate ideas, and also that kind of deep listening that you need to have.
And some really critical elders there in Clem Dodd and Richard Lake and Violet Morgan, who are members of the Elders Council and leaders around so much of this and other work.
Yes, and I mean, without them and without, you know, sometimes you get feedback from the elders, which is, you know, a bit, you know, confronting. I'm very like a sensitive person, and so but it was always I was also always so kind of thankful and grateful that they really were very strong with me, and they're such powerful, you know, people, and they push for kind of exactly what they want and they need for them and their community. And so I think everything that they've said, I tried to every single time capture as much as possible so that I could kind of make sure that I was listening to them properly and making sure that their concerns and their needs were heard. And so this is just kind of a diagram of some of the things that they kind of articulated to me in response to some of the questions that I had around what would this housing model look like for them, and what would and wouldn't work. And this is a great one about how important the river is and how it needs to be healthy, and how it's deeply tied to the health of the people. So this, you know, all of this kind of came together, and based on the feedback from the elders, they were really kind of interested in, you know, at first they were a bit unsure about a multi kind of housing clustered site, but after kind of, you know, making provisions for privacy and opportunities to connect and opportunities not to connect, we kind of came up with this idea of, you know, 9 houses on an amalgamated lot, over 3 lots, and there were 2-bedroom homes that could be kind of changed depending on the elder's need, but based on kind of this importance of the river for the site, it was the theme of Begay was chosen, which is the river. So it means the river in Gamil, and the river is such a great kind of teacher in kind of articulating how a space or how a community should feel, because the river is full of activity and life. And so this community, elders community, is about kind of drawing upon that kind of inspiration from the river, where, you know, people are walking across, you see people, you connect with them, you know, you do your thing, but also kind of it's where we're healthy. And there was also kind of a little thing about the site choice. So I've said previously about how important the site was. And so this site was chosen because of its proximity to services and amenities and Dharriwaa Elders Group, which is in town. And but really noting that one of the elders in particular, Uncle Clem, was really strong about, and I'm sure he wouldn't be the only elder in the community that was very strong about wanting to be in Gingi or close to the river, because that's where he grew up. And so noting that, you know, one particular site choice is never going to be completely supporting the elders' needs, every elder's needs. And so, you know, one site might not fit everyone, and so it might need to be multiple kind of elders villages in order to kind of make places of well-being, because that process of moving away from where we feel well or where we feel safe can kind of make us feel unwell. And within the housing, there were kind of a few communal spaces that were kind of implemented in between so that they could be used in different ways to kind of support this reciprocity, but also, support them to age well. So places where medical services or health services can come, where they can share or teach kind of, their family or younger generation. And as the project is named in language, continually trying to use language in order to kind of focus how we think about this place, because language is so fundamental to culture. So these were, each one is named in a different word to kind of speak about how they can be used and support this reciprocity. So this is the Galumali, to care for. This is Gumali, to collect or gather, so you can come together for events, lunches, dinners. Diral, probably said that wrong, but to sit and teach in like a more protected space. Yugali, to celebrate, so you can have ceremonies and things like that. And so these are kind of expanded, the design principles that, kind of came out from each of these principles, both my principle and then the Yuwaya Ngarra-li principles. So really important in the design of the actual housing was to think about it in a modular system so that the houses could be adapted for different sites, for different orientations, but also for different needs that different elders might have or different kind of precincts might need, as well as kind of potentially helping to support any future housing needs. So how can we kind of standardize it to kind of then make it a little bit flexible to change it for, a bigger family or, a single individual that doesn't need a secondary bedroom. And then, thinking about how all of these parts could come together. So this is just a drawing of how you can kind of start to kind of choose different, create different size spaces and for different orientation. So, a larger dining area for somebody that might have more family, or a smaller dining area, different kind of arrangements for living rooms, depending on how they want to utilize it. Different kind of bathroom and laundry kind of modules, different bedrooms.
I guess there was lots of discussions about accessibility too, wasn't it, for people with specific access or medical health and other reasons that they might need different size spaces, particularly in the hallway for scooters or wheelchairs and in the bathrooms, etc. So you were really mindful of that. I remember, Sam, in thinking about the different spaces.
Yeah, and so all of them are made to kind of have be accessible. They're not kind of wheelchair accessible, but they're all kind of accessible, so that if all of the elders that have walkers in here have walkers and they are fine to do that, but also kind of taking on board a lot of the health habitat kind of living guidelines that they have on there. So trying to kind of, separate laundries from bathrooms for health kind of things, but also from a cultural perspective, trying to think about, especially in these bedrooms, like how, some people might not want to have like 2 bedrooms, but like just a larger kind of sleeping quarters. And obviously this can kind of be tailored depending on who you're talking to and maybe kind of what their living arrangement looks like. But yeah, all of these things were kind of thought about to kind of make sure that, one, they're healthy places, they're accessible so that, they can age well, but also they're, I think, culturally appropriate, I didn't say. But then kind of looking at existing and what it looks like to kind of add really kind of fundamental things to existing housing to make it a lot better for elders. So, you know, simple things like putting in insulation. You know, I had Ania, who's an amazing kind of academic and architect over in the built environment, who helped with kind of the climate data analysis and kind of providing shading devices that are specifically tailored to Walgett climate. But simple things after conversations with some of them about, you know, them not having an undercovered deck so they can sit out in the middle of summer and hang out and socialize and connect with the street, and other things like, you know, simple things like trees are really kind of easy add-ons to existing homes to make them a lot more livable for elders in the interim while they're waiting for housing to be built. So this is one of the final designs. There were quite a few that were created based on the modular system, but this is the main one. And another kind of really big part of the master's process was starting to think about how different kind of aspects of the project could be, I guess, culturally connected. So how can you think about the ways that you use materials in really thoughtful ways, but also lessen the impact on country? You know, so a lot of research was undertaken in order to look at what are alternative materials? Are there any materials that can be locally sourced so that, you know, kind of the embodied energy is lessened, but also, you know, it's kind of more responding to that place, so more of a place-based approach rather than always kind of sourcing things from further away that are quite energy intensive. But also, so these are a couple of renders of the interior spaces, but also these are some of the photos of the beautiful country in and around Walgett, and just trying to kind of be inspired by that in the color palette.
I love those, Sam.
Because as we know that, you know, sometimes if, you know, both from a visual perspective, like you want to be able to see out in, you know, out and connect with country, but if you can't, then as much as possible, these kind of things or these links or connectors to this country that makes you feel at home and where you've grown up will hopefully kind of facilitate and assist in elders aging well. If they can't always kind of get outside and they need to stay in their homes, it's not kind of, you know, stuck in a dreary space. And so from one of the workshops, the second workshop that was undertaken with the elders, it became really clear that maybe we needed to develop case studies for multiple reasons, but to kind of think about the range of health needs that, you know, health and kind of family needs, which the housing might need to support, but also because it is such a personal topic, you know, sometimes when you're speaking with people about home, it becomes really personal. It's hard for them to kind of be objective and see it kind of in terms of, okay, yes, this will fit our need, but it's more about, okay, we never get, you know, unfortunately there's a history of, you know, never delivering housing that is up to the same standard as, you know, a home that you might find from a non-Indigenous person in the city. So we developed case studies, and so this is one of the case studies that helped to kind of also test if the housing was going to fit or how it could be adapted to suit a health need. So this elder, Michael, you know, these are kind of a few things that he would need. So space for family to stay, He would need assistance with transport. So it's about kind of the services he might need, it needs to be quiet, accessibility. But most importantly, he needed dialysis at home. And so this is one of the other like 4 plans that was developed. And so this one was then further kind of adjusted in order to support a home dialysis room, which is down here in the, it's like the second bedroom that's being converted, and also the bathroom and kitchen and living, everything's being converted so that it's wheelchair accessible. And these are just kind of the requirements for a home clinic. And obviously this is a certain level of kind of home dialysis, but, it's showing how the space could be adapted or provided to support, a really kind of systemic health need. And so this is just kind of looking at how that's been adjusted and how it kind of looks in different spaces of the home. And a big mandangulu to particularly everyone that's helped out, and all of the Walgett Aboriginal elders that have participated both in or led me in this process, but also kind of fought for and continue to fight for better things in their community. It's very inspiring to kind of be a part of this partnership, and it's been, I always say it's been a privilege of a lifetime to kind of do this project, and for them to trust me to do this project, as well as, everyone that's kind of supported from Yuwaya Ngarra-li and UNSW and beyond.
Thanks so much, Sam. That is a beautiful encapsulation and presentation. And I think everyone here can see just the kind of integrity that you brought to the process and the care. But also, I know it's not been your main priority, but having that recognised more generally by a number of awards has also been a really excellent way of reflecting on and bringing attention to the level of housing need. And so I guess the next step would ideally be funding to have this built. And I know that you and others at the Elders Group are looking at different options in terms of land, and that's definitely the intention. Is this is not designed for its own sake. It's not a project that is intended to stop here. That's definitely the aspiration, is to look at securing land and resources to build this. Which I think would be, really exciting. And so we can keep everybody updated on that progress, or if there's anyone joining today who's got ideas about sources of resourcing, that would be great to hear from you. Sam, it would be great to just return to a couple of questions in the minutes that we've got left.
Okay.
And it would be great to hear from you, I guess, back to that reflection around what you learned through how to balance the requirements of university and your master's, and also keeping the integrity of the process and being community-led and focused on community priorities. And I think, obviously we've all had lots of feedback about this is a fantastic project, but I also know that there was a fine line that you had to walk in order to do that. And I guess what could others joining learn for future masters or honours or PhD, or not even those working within a university context, but in industry, around this model of collaboration and how you manage to hold the integrity of that process?
Okay. So I think it was really great to kind of have, I guess, you guys, but also Eva and Michael, who were the tutors. Both of them were super flexible in how the studio kind of adapted, and we discussed a lot of the time around kind of standard kind of master's requirements, or beyond kind of what you need to do from a like a competency perspective. Is this going to be valuable for the elders group? And so every single time, and when we were kind of creating kind of the content for the master's studio, it was about, do you think this is valuable for the elders group? And so it was beyond just kind of creating something purely for for the aesthetics or because it's, fun to do. It was always kind of led by the community and the community needs and their priorities. And so I think that was really helpful to have two tutors that really flexible in that way and that could have that conversation, because I don't think that kind of collaboration always happens between kind of a tutor and a student. And so that was amazing. I mean, it was really kind of fundamental in going into this project, and it was possible because of all of the history and work of Yuwaya Ngarra-li between kind of UNSW and the Dharriwaa Elders Group. I think you do see kind of people trying to recreate these types of things, but if you don't have that existing relationship beforehand, it becomes incredibly difficult. Even as like an individual kind of student, researcher, designer, the first time I went up there, it was about kind of being like, this is who I am, and creating and exist like a relationship that then was built upon. But it made it a lot easier because one, I had all of the support from Yuwaya Ngarra-li to do that in a way that wasn't going to do any harm to the community. But also it made it easier for me to kind of come into the community and have a layer of trust that wouldn't be there if you don't have that community-led partnership.
We've got a neat segue here, Sam, because Eileen Baldry has her hand up. I think here she is.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Sam. That was amazing. And despite the fact that I've been involved in this program of work and this partnership for a long time, the way in which you've described this is such a terrific development in how universities, how groups and agencies and people that are not part of the Elders Group, the Dharriwaa Elders Group, can be respectful and do the work that they want done. So congratulations. It really is terrific. I do hope you can get some funding to do some trial buildings and development. But I wanted to ask you a sort of a broader question, and that is, as you have noted, Walgett is a creation of colonisation in that it's pushed together a number of Aboriginal communities and language groups. And did that come up as an issue that some of the elders may have wanted to be on their original country, or was it that they valued being in Walgett, which is a created town in a sense, but nevertheless still on country which might not have been their original country 200 years ago? I don't know whether that was something you discussed with them, or whether that, is a consideration in the built environment for Aboriginal communities and particularly Aboriginal elders.
That specifically wasn't brought up in the conversations, but I think they did bring up kind of relationships or dynamics within the community and how to kind of manage different kind of personalities within the kind of having multiple houses on one site. And so they were a bit concerned about how you would manage arguments and things like that, which as much as possible, tried to kind of mitigate. One, I spoke to somebody that has done a project up in Cairns who had a similar problem with elders up there, and she kind of suggested that you have kind of a separation, or you have your own kind of allotment to try and mediate any arguments, but also based on conversations with community housing providers, they said that it's one of those things that you try and kind of address as soon as possible so that things don't escalate. And so I think, you know, in terms of thinking, that's kind of how I started to try and understand how you kind of prevent or mitigate these kind of tensions, but not specifically about different language groups. I think there was more discussion about, I want to live here, or I want to live next to the river. Yeah.
Sam, there's a very beautiful question from B. Hardy in the chat, which I think would be the perfect place to finish up. B says, Sam, amazing. What would your dream for what would be your dream for this, which is clearly inclusive of the dream for community? And how can all of the university and Australian government commercial support you to bring your dream for this to life?
That's a good question, and a big question. I mean, I think, you know, ideally, you know, obviously, you know, I did this project so that the elders could have this housing project, have good quality, safe, affordable housing that they deserve. I think that, you know, it's something that this community and probably a lot of communities really deserve. And I think ideally it would be kind of funded in a way that allows them to continue to kind of manage it and have their own agency in how it's operated, because, you know, they know what they want, they know what they need, and they just kind of need, you know, funding or support to kind of do that, and taking that step back and allowing, you know, partnerships like this to kind of to have the organization kind of lead it and drive it, I think would be my dream. And that, you know, I guess kind of articulating to other kind of partnerships just how to kind of do it well, and I guess other kind of architects to do it well, so that we can kind of learn from good processes and good partnerships.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sam, for your extraordinary work on this project, and your ongoing work on various models of housing in Walgett as part of Yuwaya Ngarra-li. And thank you all for joining us today, for your thoughtful questions and wonderful responses. This recording will also be available. If others are interested in engaging or you'd like to share it, we'll send that out in the next week. Our next webinar in October is going to be focused on the efforts led by the Dharriwaa Elders Group in Walgett around dealing with fine debt. So that'll be an absolute cracker. You'll hear from Elders Group staff who are working with people in Walgett to work off their fine debt in really constructive community and culturally led ways, as well as advisors from the Aboriginal Legal Service and elsewhere who are working with them. So that's a really exciting project. As ever, stay in touch via the website and the usual forms of contact. Love to hear from you about any interest or follow-up questions that you might have. And thanks once again, Sam.
Thanks.